third installment of the pod radio You Need Your Planet. I'm your host, Enrique Lescure, and I'm also the chairperson of the EOS, which you well know about. Today, this beautiful spring Sunday in Umeå, Västerbotten, we have with us a very special and very highly esteemed guest, Professor Dag Lindgren of the Swedish Agricultural University. I hope that I didn't misrepresent your titles, and I bid you welcome. And we would like to hear a little bit about your background.
I became professor in 1977, but I retired 2009. So what I say now, you should not blame at the university. And then retired, you spent your time on thinking on some other problems. Not so much about population growth, but anyway, a little.
You were originally a professor in physics, I have heard.
No, my filkand.
Your bachelor's?
Basic university examen is in physics and mathematics and a little meteorology.
But you're working with the forest for decades?
Yes, very surprising. 1968. I knew nothing about forests or genetics or biology, but 7 years later I became the highest authority in the field of forest genetics. Shows that it's something wrong with society, nothing else.
That is really awesome. And also you are a kind of a migratory bird. You are originally from southern Sweden, but you decided to stay here up in the north.
I'm from Uppsala. My background is in Uppsala, Stockholm. But 78 I moved to Umeå. I got an offer you can't refuse, so to say. If I moved to Umeå, I'd become professor for a lifetime. Or till retirement, 2009, and I would be given some resources. And the most important resource a professor has, it's his hand and his brain, which he can use as he wishes. This with data is good you have, but you can always find someone you can cooperate with who has the data, so it's not so needed.
So the reason why I believe that you are a very interesting person and a very interesting political activist, if I may say so, is because you wrote an article in the local newspaper last year where you critiqued the growth goals of Umeå. And then I wonder, why do you believe that every city, town and region in the world primarily want to have exponential growth when it comes to population, consumption and spreading of economic wealth? Now, for example, in Umeå, we are building this new 1,500 apartment area, Tomtebostrand, which is going to connect the two areas of Tomtebo and Nydala. You can look them up on Google Maps. And the main problem with that is that from where should Umeå get the population? But my question is, why? Why do we want to grow?
Because other ways you do not get elected as a local politician.
Is it that simple?
Yes, I think so. And of course, if you get the city to grow, you may get a street mentioned after you or a school or something like that. So you will get some honor from your good work if the city grows.
Well, that is true. That's always something to go down in history with. And we can see this tendency not only on the local level, but also on the national level. Every year there are several meetings held where where our elected leaders and our dare I say, unelected leaders are discussing how to maximize economic growth. And of course, both you and me know full well that economic growth has several benefits, but there are also some increased risks with that, and I'm sure that we get to talk about them. So right now, the topic of today is population growth. And where we are going to go from there is that today we are 7.7, I think, billion people on the planet. And what we need to be is maybe a little bit less. But could you elaborate, when will the world as we know it be overpopulated?
It became overpopulated some decades ago already. According to some calculations, we need 2 Earths to support the current population on the current level, and we become more, and for at least 2 billion people are just too poor. They must consume more resources. So another calculation which has been presented, it's if you look on the biomass of mammals, 96% is people and their domesticated species. Only 4% remains for the wild.
Yes.
So overcrowded.
That's quite extreme. I also know that 1/3 of all the usable land surface on the planet is used to grow food for livestock. And we all know that it is not very sustainable. So now the question comes, what strategies are there to mitigate this potential crisis?
Well, population growth, mitigate that. I mean, of course, we cannot make big cuts, but I think it would be realistic to reduce the population growth so we become 10% less people, 260 than projected today. And how should we do that? First, we must realize it as some type of desirable thing. Politicians must realize it. As it is now, politicians always want growth. And when people think that growth is something good, population growth is something good, as the politicians, the local politicians are too keen of it. And that will sort of stimulate nativity, so people get more children than other ways. And it's not taught in schools that we have an overpopulation even here in Sweden, which is a problem for the world. Schools must be somewhat more, optimistic.
I'm actually working at schools right now, and there is a lot of the material in the natural sciences department, which actually is quite good and quite up to scale, better than in the social sciences, I would argue. But my question would be, firstly, that Sweden, as I understood it, has a population growth that is actually, if we just account for nativity, we are below replacement level. And that's in itself, it's problematic for society, but it is not really that problematic for the environment. And my question would be, for it seems like nativity is very much connected to female fertility and the first time a female gets a child. And in some of the countries with the highest nativity numbers in the world, the typical age for becoming a mother for the first time is 15 years of age. So maybe the most effective way of reducing nativity will be compulsory university education for all females on the entire planet.
In Sweden, the average first parenthood age is 30, roughly. But some get children earlier and some rise big family numbers. And I think that nativity in Sweden is also a problem, because if a world population in average need 2 globes to support them. Swedes need 4 globes to support them. So the population is a problem in Sweden also, and I would like it to get smaller populations, so to say. But when I was born, it was 6 million people in Sweden. Now it's 10 million. And it will not take long time till we get 11. I don't see that as desirable.
No, it's basically argued that we need more people to uphold the elderly care for basically to have enough staff in elderly care. But I myself think that that debate has just been to a large extent a smokescreen, because you need to put more public funds, more public resources into that for it to become a reality. I remember 10 years ago when our then Prime Minister stated that in the future we won't have any unemployment because everyone who are unemployed will be needed within the elderly care sector. But at the same time, that government kind of slashed down the funding which might have been needed to do that change. So I cannot see that the policy right now is consistent or even really makes sense, because even though we have low nativity, we have had a large immigration. Now the issue is with that is that the immigrants need to support from the community to get themselves integrated into the labor market. But unsurprisingly, that hasn't really happened to the extent that is necessary. So the strategy right now is kind of spiraling, and I cannot see any tendency at the moment at focusing on taking care of people who cannot take care of themselves any longer. What are your thoughts about this debate? I think that you're a little bit on the older scale. I think you're a little bit older than I am.
When your university has imported a lot of foreigners, and I have, and they are, say, productive, it's favorable for Sweden to get them. I think that the work import has been favorable for Sweden. If you looked on, how much we produce, they increase production. But you worry about the care of the elderly. But people have got more healthy. The average age increases, and when people die, and they are more healthy than they are older. So we can increase the retirement age and use those old people for taking care of other old people, for example. So we solve that problem for the old people.
That's actually a pretty good idea. At the same time, we still would need to increase funding somewhat. That would become kind of easier because the current funding system as it looks today is based on, well, basically confiscating a piece of the money from the working population. So that could be a potential solution. Then that is just a discussion about the debate from the perspective of our politicians. But then the really big question is, what is really the biggest problem? Is it overproduction or overpopulation, or are they moving hand in hand?
Both things are problems. The demand for resources, the load on the work, on the earth, it's per capita consumption, or you can see it per capita production, times the number of people. So both are important. You can't separate them. Less people means less stress on the earth. Less consumption also mean less stress on the earth. But consumption would be easy to reduce very fast. The problem is in our decision structure. We select politicians, and no one becomes elected politician if he speaks about less consumption. So it will not be, our system doesn't allow for that great reduction in consumption and production which would be needed. And we also have in the system its democracy and its strong lobby groups. So if you try to reduce something, you get strong lobby groups which will argue against, and politics will be some type of compromise. We can still run cars, we can still fly, we can still live on several places. You have a house and a summer cottage and a cottage in will in the mountains, travel between them. It's very difficult to fight this because some lobby would fight against.
Yes, I agree. And personally, I do like the idea of democracy very much. I like the idea of people having an influence over how the public interests are affecting their own lives. But in this case, democracy can be said to contribute to a retardation of the decision that needs to be made regarding how we are using resources and the overall implications of our relationship with nature. And yet one could hear that some arguments from some political actors that the environment is getting better. For example, you know very well that the amount of forests on the northern hemisphere have increased, and those people are claiming that, exponential growth will only make the environment better, and then cite those examples and cite also reduced numbers of poverty in the world, because reduced poverty means that people care about having a cleaner, more beautiful environment around them. What would you say to those people?
You can always have fantasies, and they may be realistic, how we may increase resources, but this is not implemented. So say the promises are always larger than what's really implemented. And it's part of that it's overestimated, the progress. It's this political system. You must convince the politicians. And then they invest in things which doesn't produce as much as promised. I believe that forest is a growing resource when we get rid of fossil resources. They are replaced by using forests. But and the forest growth has doubled in a century. But still, it doesn't keep pace with the population growth as a resource. We don't get more forest per capita, so to say, even if it grows better. And those fighting for environment say that forest is harmful in a lot of ways for environment. And I think this is over-exaggerated in Sweden. We have a forest with the same species. It's still mostly pine and birch and spruce, as it was 1,000 years ago. It has become a little more spruce, and so you can discuss about such things. But anyway, it's no drastic change just with forest. It's much more, and forest is 70% of our area, and it has not changed so drastically, in spite of that sometimes trees are harvested, more trees than earlier. But there were disasters in the forest earlier also. 1% of all forest burnt each year earlier. Now it's the worst fire year we have had, 2018. 1 per mil of a forest burnt, 10% less than on an average year a number of hundred years ago. Trees were wind felled earlier also.
It could also be argued that forest fires actually to some extent are good for forests.
They are good for some part of the wildlife, yes. And now we burn forest intentionally to help this wildlife, which is depending on fire.
It should be noted that in the tropics, forests are still being slashed and burnt to a larger degree than they are replaced. And when they are replaced by monocultures to a large extent. This is not least true for the Amazon, and this is kind of a problem now when Jair Bolsonaro is the president of Brazil. But I would like to change topic and move back to population growth, because we have a new trend that is emerging, not the least in the United States, called longevity. And the matter is that to find a way to slow aging and ensure that human beings can live for hundreds of years. And the question is, what would the successful implementation of such new life-altering technologies be for what kind of population policy we would need to have?
Well, if nativity doesn't increase, I mean the number of child per person doesn't increase, it doesn't matter if people live longer.
If people live for 500 years?
I doubt that if you just change the biology of people, I mean 500 years, when it's a question of accidents also. And that's an alarming thing. I mean, which proves that we are not so civilized, that the chimpanzee population, around 2% of all chimpanzees die by intentional acts of other chimpanzees. In the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, sometimes in the Viking Age, maybe sometimes earlier, maybe 10% of the population died because of intentional actions by other humans. Even in the First and Second World War, it may be somewhat worse than chimpanzees. But after Second World War, till the Arabic Spring, you could say that the number of people killed by other people decreased, and we were down to 2% for chimpanzee level. We were as civilized as the chimpanzees. But when it stopped to decrease, we are still, since 2000 or something like that, killing each other to the same amount as chimpanzees do. And that really shows that we do not consider others in the way we should do to live in a sustainable way.
This is really interesting. So you say that for every 100 persons born on this earth, 2 will be killed by other human beings.
Yes, some are, unintentional. You drop a bomb somewhere, and then there is a collateral damage which kills some people you actually do not mean to kill. But it's not, in Sweden it's somewhat lower. I should say we are a little more civilized than the average country of the world. We do not know exact figure because some murders are hidden, so to say. You don't know what some people are killed, which are killed. I mean on hospital or where you have very old people. Sometimes it's released, sometimes it's not released. You do not know really what happens in the homes with old people.
Especially not old people who lack relatives and similar. I know about those problems quite much because I heard of what could happen with people who don't have relatives actively looking after them in the homes regarding staff neglect and similar. But to say at least this sounds absolutely horrific, that what you're saying, that there is that every one of us has murdered 0.02 human beings.
I say, but I mean many of those are militaries, of course. And it's in domestic wars or real wars.
and then the new favorite, proxy wars. I would like to ask one question more, and in your estimate, would we be able to prod on indefinitely like we are doing today with this system of exponential growth, so we can expand infrastructure which we need more exponential growth to uphold in like an eternal cycle? Could we prod on with this indefinitely? If we cannot do that, when will it start to tear apart?
Of course, one cannot answer, but remember that population growth took place in spite of all humans are doing to each other, so to say. And so I think that hostilities doesn't stop population growth, but it's a problem with sustainable. What I'm afraid of is a civilization crash, and I don't think that climate or population growth will be the direct cause to the population crash and end of civilization. But they recently have in Sweden a play. They have at least taken attention of the possibility where the scenario was a sunstorm. The sun ejects a ray to the earth, which stops all electronics. We do not know how commonly this happens. We know that the chance is less than 1% per year, because otherwise we would have detected it before, so to say. But 200 years we didn't have the technology which would detect this as a crash, so to say. But now electricity may crash, everything electric, internet may crash. And can we rebuild the society after such a crash? I mean, we can switch off the connector, but can we switch it on again? Maybe that's impossible. And when we have to live in a way which can't sustain more than 10% of the current population, but if we do, will anyway anyone survive? Because then it would be thieves and stealing it, so to say. If someone knows that there is a food resource somewhere, they will take it, and then they will destroy the food resource in the same time, so to say. So nothing remains.
That's a very interesting question. And to clarify, I think the last big sunstorm that hit the Earth hit it in 1853. And that was before we had, let's say, an electrical civilization. It was before both the simple current and the alternate current. I would say that I think, at least in the developed world, we has a sort of impact absorber, and that would be the supermalls. They have lots and lots of canned food, and I think that if there is a situation with a huge population that quickly is running out of food, the prime strategic objectives for those who are a bit more ruthless and more survival oriented would be to fight battles over ICA Maxi, Coop Forum and Willys.
The big storages in Sweden are electronics. You can't handle them if there is no electronics. And even if it is food on such places, for the human population, it's a question of weeks or months. It's not a question of forever.
It's a question of actually days before they will be empty. Because people will hoard them in case of an emergency, which is quite understandable, because if they become extremely scarce, we will need to handle them during the winter, hypothetically speaking. And now when we are discussing an apocalypse scenario, we are discussing it in very sudden terms. But personally, I think that a realistic collapse scenario would actually occur over decades, and the problem would be how to reconcile the very ideological and monetary financial foundations of our system with the way our reality actually works. and how we should be able to manage resources in a wiser, more prudent way on the planet. So the question is, if we would have a sudden collapse, it would be like putting a frog in boiling water. It will jump away. But isn't it more worrisome the thought that we might be slowly boiled alive and not recognize that we are being boiled?
I think that if resources demand slowly, it's no threat to civilization, so to say, because civilization may fight to get some part of civilization surviving. Even if some die, some part of civilization will survive. The libraries and the knowledge, for example. So a slow decay is not that threat to civilization, but humans will be less civilized because they will behave so some die by protecting the available resources with military and police.
I believe that it is possible to facilitate a peaceful transition from an unsustainable society to a sustainable society, and I believe that it is and it must be possible to do so on a global level.
Theoretically, it's possible. It's even easy, but I say we have not a system which allows this to happen. We have democracy. We should take care of people. We should not kill. And politicians are elected by people.
The absolutely most important thing, in my opinion, about any political and social system is that it must put restraints on itself, because human collective power that is unrestrained is, in my opinion, one of the absolutely most frightful things on earth. The only thing more frightful is a situation where no one is in charge and no one has any responsibility and there aren't any laws. So the big challenge, in my opinion, for human history has been to find the right balance where we can solve our disputes in a peaceful manner. And I actually think that Western liberal democracy has succeeded with that. Shame only that while succeeding with that, we are creating an even larger problem under that problem, which is about mismanaging the planet's resources in a very, very bad manner. And I think this contradiction is potentially the greatest threat against human civilization.
We do not get better in, what shall you say, governing and cooperation or something like that. Look at the Trump era. Unexpected, but it happened. Look at Brexit. I mean, such things has happened before, but the rate doesn't decay.
Well, that the system is kind of unraveling right now is because what I would argue, as a political scientist, the inherently parasitical nature of the entire system, that the system needs to gain super profits in order to sustain its growing mountain of debt. For every $1 you create in new wealth, $3 new are created in debt, and eventually the system will move on to feed on the middle classes that have sustained the system as consumers and will exploit them more directly. And they will answer by electing populist leaders who will promise things that they cannot do within the current system. But who knows? My analysis would maybe has too broad strokes on its brush. What do you think?
Theoretically, I agree with you. You talk about debt, but it's also a question of that the Swedish people is richer now than ever before. And that means that you do not hit their consumption by taxes, so to say. They own so much, Swedes own so much money, have so much capital. So you cannot, so to say, reduce consumption.
The same with Americans. Americans have never been as rich as today if you look at per capita. But if you look at their society on a lower level, you see that there has been increased class differences in society, and that is putting a higher pressure on the middle classes to perform, as well as the issue of, well, basically, should we have free trade treaties that will maximize growth but will hurt some industries and some workers, or should we protect those workers but have lower growth for the economy in total? And those workers would be interested in protecting their own style of life because they are happy right now and they don't want to move and reschool themselves, and possibly reschooling is not even possible. To not speak about the looming specter or promise of automation, for example, self-driving trucks and self-driving buses, which are coming to Sweden right now. So I think, what are your thoughts about automation and its role in terms of population growth?
Well, human work is less needed, it seems. So we do not need so many humans.
That's a positive effect.
It's a positive effect if we reduce the population.
It probably will contribute to a less amount of humans, but on the other hand, unemployment could actually, I believe, increase nativity slightly, because people will have more time to, well, make babies. So that's just a fun thought I had right now. But
you talked about free trade. And free trade and globalization, so say international trends, and that makes things cheaper, so we can consume more because it's cheaper to consume. It's favorable for what you call a living standard. It's no doubt about that. But that the control becomes undefined global. You do not know anymore where the control is. You have the political system can't control the control of the global system. That's which make it in a way independent and unstoppable. And another aspect of this globalization is that people move around the globe and move things around the globe, and it costs a lot of climate gas, resources and climate gases, so to say. We destroy the environment by this increased travel of people and resources, which free trade means and globalization means. So now I thought globalization was a good thing till 10 years ago, but now I've changed opinion. It's too much globalization.
I think that there should be able to be a flow of resources from continent A to continent B, but that prices need to reflect the effects on the environment, and that's the absolutely essential part of it. So like if you are buying batteries from China, transporting them should be accounted for in the price in comparison to if you buy batteries from Skellefteå, for example.
But no one makes a tax on flying internationally. I mean on the fuel, so to say. It's tax-free, so to say. The air companies has made that trade, and it's the same thing with freight ships. When they are the oceans, they pay nothing for the transport. We have not mastered that, in spite of that it has been known for a long time. We have not the system, the lobbies are too strong.
Exactly.
The international system is too weak. The United Nations is too weak.
Yes, and here's the big crux, because I'm almost of the opinion that in the long run, if we are going to deal with this convergence of crisis, which I used to talk about, we will need to move towards a more integrated global system. But at the same time, people in all countries want to protect their own interests, and we both know that this integrated global system, if democratic, will see a lot of debates which really are just wastes of time. Like, for example, arguing for special exception for special countries for special situations. So it won't be an easy thing to facilitate a sustainable transition, but I still believe that it needs to be done, and I believe that I, in what limited regard I am capable of doing that, has an obligation to try to facilitate that development.
Good luck.
Thank you. And with those words, I think we can finish this talk, and I think it was really funny and really eye-opening to hold this conversation, and I hope our listeners are thinking the same and that they come with critical input and similar. I can suggest to our listeners that they visit our website at usprojects.com and that they also likes our page at facebook.com/usprojects. Thank you so very much, Dag, and I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope we could have more conversations in the future, because I believe that you have many interesting thoughts.
Thank you for inviting me.